What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now. I'm Alex, and in this video, I want to give you guys my early impressions on Dragon Age the Veilguard. I finally played this game. I put in 6 hours, and today I'm going to continue going on. I'm going to get easily 10, 15 plus hours in as we go in the next day or two. So hopefully I can give you guys a review later on in the week, because right now I don't have too much to say other than this game is fine. I think this is a fine game. I don't think it is a good game. I don't think it is a bad game. Now, you could call that copping out. I would disagree, because I'm going to honestly go into some depth in the characters and story and gameplay and stuff in this video. I also don't think I've gotten far enough. I keep getting, I obviously see both sides of it. There's a lot of people that absolutely hate this game, but there's also, I saw a fair amount of people that told me that it gets good around Act 2, that it gets good around 10, 15 hours in. Now, that's almost a different discussion of if a game takes 10 plus hours to get good, is the game worthy of being called good? That's actually a very interesting conversation that I think we've maybe talked about before, and that could be the case here, right? This game maybe picks up 10, 12 hours in, but you could argue, is that even good? Is that actually a thing that people would tolerate, right? And maybe we can talk about that in the review once I actually beat this game. So 6 hours in, what do I think? The game, I will say, feels a little weird, and it's probably, there's probably a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons is probably because if you've heard me talk, and I've done videos on my third channel, my retrospective channel, I've covered Dragon Age Origins and Dragon Age 2. I've just played those two games. I've played those two in the last 2 or 3 months. So, and I put in 30 plus hours into both of them. So I'm used to some of the more rigid, right? And even the gameplay style and stuff. Now, I know Inquisition was a pull away from that, and I can tell you, playing this game, the actual gameplay part feels like a mix of Inquisition and probably Dragon Age 2. There is still a seed of the earliest Dragon Age gameplay in this. Now, I'm mage. I'm playing as a mage. I've played as mage this whole time. So when I replayed Origins and I replayed 2, I was playing as a mage. And, some of the moves, when you're spinning around and you're shooting out that last shot, if you're spamming square, right? It still reminds me of that earliest, age to it. But it's got this fluidity and a little bit more of this action-y feel than obviously any of those other games had, right? So I want to kind of start there, because it was something it took a while. It took a while to be okay, what is this game? Well, it's not, it feels a little, you can sense that most small, part of Dragon Age Origins and 2 still in it. And I can see Inquisition as well. Now, it's been a very long time. I'm going to play Inquisition after the Veilguard, which is maybe the wrong order, but I can remember a little bit of it, and I can also see a little of that in. But this is a new age. This is literally a new age. Now, I'm not going to say it's a return to form, because what form, right? What are we returning to? I think it is I don't even know if you want to call it an evolution, because this is just something different. This is the next path that you would expect BioWare is going, I guess, after Inquisition and Andromeda and Anthem. And again, it's not terrible. Now, I think the biggest issue I have with this game is it's slow. It's just, it got me honestly bored. That's what I would say. Now, there are times where it picks up. I would say, and there's side stuff, and I actually, that's kind of where it felt the most Dragon Age to me, is when you're out doing a quest for Harding or something, and you run into a spirit, and you take the quest, and you can go off and you can do that stuff. That is where I felt most at home, right? Having just played 60 hours of the old games, that's where it felt the most familiar to me. But moments, I would say this, Solus and Varric, whenever they're on screen, the game's elevated. And maybe it's not recency bias, maybe it's just because I've seen these characters before, right? Because these characters are very good characters. We have a history with them. I guess more so than any other character, right? There's other returning characters, but those two probably being the most prominent. Now, they're not in it a lot. That's one kind of issue 6 hours in. I've spoken to Solus has been on screen 3 times, I believe, and Varric maybe 4, maybe 5, and not very long, right? Their impact is not very big. Now, I guess that kind of goes into the other characters, right? Honestly, when it comes to Nev, I'm pretty fine with her. She's kind of actually my favorite of the group so far. Harding's tough. I would say this, Harding and Ballara are both kind of the same to me, where sometimes they stand out. Sometimes there's a moment or two where I'm yeah, I really like this character. And then other times it's just again, not necessarily bad, but just blah. It doesn't really matter what they're saying. I'm not really into whatever that conversation might be, right? I would say Nev is kind of a step over that. And then so far, right, it's been those 3, obviously Varric, Cleric, and then Lucanus. Okay, now I think Lucanus is actually a really cool character. And I actually went pretty deep into his side story already, like his side quest or his companion quest, I guess. And it lost me a little bit, like as it kept going. Again, it doesn't have like that pull, but him and like what he's battling, like the possession kind of thing that's going on, really like. I think actually that's one of the cooler elements I've seen in this entire game is that. And like I said, like Solus, like he is cool, and like there's a lot of info and like the bickering you can do with him, and you know the idea that he basically accidentally, I guess, swapped himself where now he's in a prison and the elven gods have made its way out, so now they're the new threat. I mean, we knew a lot of this going in, but I think they've done a pretty okay job. Now, in terms of like that massive stress where like, okay, the world is in danger, I don't think they've done a good enough job of like that urgency. There doesn't seem to be, for me, any urgency, any like, okay, this is massively important and we need to get this stuff done. It kind of, honestly, it feels like I'm just checking boxes. And look, I am kind of a sucker for those games. You give me a game with like 15 question marks on a map and then one main objective, I'm going to do those question marks before I do the main objective. That's just I don't even know, what mentally would be wrong with me to justify that, but that's how I play games. I played The Witcher 3 like that. Pretty much any game I do stuff like that. So it kind of is a game that's up my alley because I don't mind doing 6 side quests that I'm not really like into what's going on, but like there are things to do. You're opening up chests, you're getting items, and a lot of that stuff is simplistic. I guess that's another thing I want to talk about. Depending on who you are, you might look at this as a major negative actually, or nothing at all. I look at it as somewhat of a negative because, again, replaying Origins, I really like the individuality. I really like just having this stack of freaking armor and weapons and figuring out like what makes the most sense per character, right? Now, Dragon Age 2 dumbed it down a considerable amount, and I don't even know if dumbed it down. It took away a lot of the mechanics of like the RPG stuff, okay? And I don't, again, remember Inquisition as well as those two because I just played them. This is easily the most dumbed down and stripped down version you're ever going to get in this, like going in order, right? I thought Dragon Age 2 dumbed it down. This one really does. Now, again, like depending on who you are, that might not matter. And actually, depending on which situation I'm in, I might not care, right? Like sometimes I'm just opening things up kind of rapid fire. I'll get an item and it's like, oh, this clearly is better than what that character has. Let's equip it. But there's just, I don't know, like the kind of strategy and the planning. There's a little in terms of like, picking like your moves. Like, I think I've gotten to the point, I think I've unlocked 4 spells and you only have 4 slots. So like any other spells I'm going to get, I am going to have to like work on that stuff. So there's a little bit of that like individuality, right? Being able to kind of specialize your character and your companion's character. But there's really not a lot. And that also goes into the gameplay, right? For me, the gameplay is kind of a mix. Actually, the entire game is kind of a mix, right? But the gameplay, I will say, as it gets going, it gets rather good. There's a couple boss fights. I think boss fights is where this game kind of shines because you do have to focus. It's not, when you're going through like just day-to-day enemies, there is kind of like this lull repetition thing that goes on. But when you're fighting bosses, especially bosses that are like more powerful than you do have to focus. You do have to plan things a little bit better. And I think the combat actually gets better because of that. Also, just as you keep going, the combat gets better. So that does, I will say this. In terms of like the story and characters, I really don't know where it's going to go. Like, is it going to stay in this, like, sometimes it's pretty good, most times it's just whatever kind of state that it's in right now? Is that where that's going? With the combat, like going into hour 10, 15, 20, 25, I'm actually quite excited to give you guys like my updated thoughts on the combat because I can tell you playing 5.5 hours in versus 1 hour, completely different, right? Like you're more powerful, you're dealing more damage, just your moves in general, right? Obviously you're upgrading all that stuff. You just get more stuff. And I mean, that honestly, that is actually pretty in line, and that made me feel, again, familiar with like the old stuff because that is generally how these games have gone, right? Like you're not starting with everything, and once you unlock like the meteor shower like fire thing, right, like in the first game, let's say, or the lightning bolt. I mean, again, I've done mage this whole time, so I've kind of gotten familiar with like, all right, you start with these base attacks, then all of a sudden you're like raining fire and electricity down by hour 30 or 40. Like that is still here. That is still here. And again, it still has somewhat of a feel of the old game. So the combat is fine. The combat maybe is even good at times. Now, the one thing I don't like about the combat really, and I will say, does come down actually to those characters, the companions. And I mean, the switching of them is obviously an issue that we talked about going into the game, but let me tell you something, okay? One thing that nagged me was not even the switching of them, but it's the enemy's reaction to them. I'm really disappointed in this, and I don't know if it's going to change as the game goes. I kind of doubt it, to be honest with you. The enemies do not attack your companions. In the 6 hours, I saw my companions get attacked like 5 times, and they would like get knocked back. But because they have no life, right, no health bar or anything, it doesn't matter. None of that stuff matters. So you are kind of constantly, at least me as a mage, I'm kind of far away. I'm not like super far. I'm not like right up against the enemy, right? A lot of enemies are ranged attacks, and you'll see like the projectile coming. I'm dodging, as you guys are probably seeing from my gameplay, I'm dodging nonstop because the enemies only attack you. They don't attack anybody else. So, like, if you're fighting an enemy one-on-one, you can't rely on, like, the other enemies being distracted by your allies. More likely than not, they will turn their attention to you at some point, and you're going to have to dodge them too. So that is what I don't like. And that, it does come back to switching characters, because I think just the whole mechanic of it is kind of broken in that way, right? Where it's like, well, why would you switch characters when the enemies are programmed to really only go after the main character? If I switched to Harding, they wouldn't attack me, so it wouldn't even matter. So I guess I get it. I guess I understand. But those two things are kind of interlinked, right? So it's not, I don't want to tread old water and say, the switching a companion. We've talked about that. We've done that. But what I actually found interesting is that leads into the enemies and how they attack. And I'm not pleased with that. I would say just in general, that does make me kind of mad, because it's like I'm trying to focus on one enemy or whatever, and then 3 others are attacking me, and it's like, okay, luckily I'm a mage. I kind of have like crowd control, where I can do like the firewall and I can deal damage to like multiple enemies. Thank God, because if I couldn't, I don't even know what I'd be doing. And that's just, that's just how it goes. So gameplay, I would say, maybe above average at times. It's fine, or elements to it are definitely not good, but overall I would say it's probably like a net more than positive, right? Story and characters, I would say are there's times where it picks up, there's times where it's fine. Like the world itself, what's interesting, again, I want to see like where this is going. So like the visuals and the colors and the cartooniness, I will say, maybe contrary to like the popular negative belief out there, I would say once I kind of got used to it, I think the characters themselves are fine. I think like seeing Varric like that, seeing Harding, Nev, even your character as Rook, I think it looks fine. Actually, I think it kind of looks good. Now, when it gets into like where it's supposed to be like the dark fantasy, right? And you're thinking about the Blight or like the Darkspawn, right? So they talked about how, well, it's not going to be the whole game is all this colorful thing. There will be times where it's not. And what's funny is, if you guys remember those previews where, like, literally the previews, and the journalists were saying, hey, there's actually this entire segment of the game where it looks dark. Like, it looks like, okay, well, there is this section. Well, funny enough, that section is right after you see the Darkspawn, and in my opinion, they look terrible, right? So you see them as like these cartoony things, and then you go into this area where, I won't spoil it, it's kind of cool. It's a cool side story going on, and there's an entire basically town that was destroyed by them, and it is dark. It actually, even in terms of like the coloring of the blood and the character, they look like Origins, okay? So they do have that. Now the issue is, that was one time in 6 hours, and it was right after you saw the Darkspawn for the first time. You fight them as cartoons, like for the first little while, then you do this where it kind of breaks the trend of the colors and all that stuff, and then it goes back. So, okay, the journalists said that in the previews, but from what we know about the previews, they were pretty selective of what journalists played, right? They jumped them around even without actually telling them they were jumping them around. So, okay, well, going now with me right now, in the future, what's the color scheme? Where are we going? Like, am I going to expect the 5.5 hours I played of the colorfulness to be the entire game, and then maybe like 30 minutes here and there? Or is it going to be more 50-50? Like, what's it going to be? I don't know, because they said it's not really. It's not supposed to be 95.5, but it might be. So we'll see how that kind of goes. But, I will say, again, like to actually be, to be honest and to be kind of contrary to what I thought was going to happen, the colors and all that stuff, like in the moment, it's fine. I think it's only when you start to compare it to the past stuff. But I will say, like specifically the Darkspawn, like when you bring back elements of these games that are dark and gritty and just like the color scheme is that 2009, gray, kind of like Gears of War, Infamous, right? Like when you had those colors, if you bring that stuff back, then I expect it to kind of look like that, right? I mean, if you want to do a new thing, that's fine, and a lot of this game is that new thing, and I think it's okay for what it's trying to do. But then when you bring in the Darkspawn, you bring in other stuff, it's like, okay, well, now I'm expecting it to kind of be more dark and like, again, that kind of grayish tone that we saw in 2009 pretty specifically, or, obviously a little bit earlier as well. So, yeah, that's kind of my opinion on, like, the art style and stuff. And then I guess, like, I mean, I mentioned the characters, the voice work so far, and even, like, the writing. I've seen some stuff. Obviously, there's been, like, the clips shown around of, like, very overly preachy, moments in this game. Not a fan of that. I've not gotten to that, and I also don't know if that even happens depending on what character you pick. So I don't, I can bring it up in the sense of I haven't seen it, but I can't talk about, how it affected my specific game, because I will say, like, 6 hours in, it's a story that is trying at times, and it's it's trying to establish stuff, but there's nothing like that. I've not experienced anything like that. It seems like it's just a fine story that's not gripping enough. It's gripping at times, but not like the entire time, right? That's kind of where I'm at. So yeah, I mean, so far, I don't want to say so far so good. So far, it's a game. So far, it's a game that I'm playing, and I'm enjoying parts of it. Honestly, I'm enjoying the combat probably more than anything, especially as the game continues to go. And again, like, for me, it is this checklisty type game, and that's not necessarily a positive, right? Again, depending on who you are, where I'm going through and I'm doing these side, and I'm leveling up. I think I'm higher than I'm supposed to be for the main stuff because I'm doing all the side stuff first, right? So I'm checking away the side stuff. None of it is all that good, but, like, the combat's pretty okay. The puzzles are very weak, right? They are, I don't even know why the puzzles are the way that they are. They're extremely easy. They actually just shouldn't have puzzles in the game, at least at the point that I'm at. The puzzles are just way too easy. But you go through, you open things, you swap out your item for a better item, you fight, you level up, you get more abilities, and you complete quests, right? And I mean, for me, like, in a sense, that is fine. I can check those things off, and that satisfies a part of my brain. The part of my brain that wants more is, mostly what we talked about here, right? There's definitely stuff that I want them to continue to add or improve, and we'll see. Because some people say it gets better. Some people say, like, skill up, right? I'm pretty sure he said, like, it just kept staying the same. He was hoping, okay, hour 10, hour 20, hour 30, and it just never came, right? I think Mr. Matty plays the same thing, but I have seen people that have said, hey, yeah, Act 2 is where it picks up. I've seen commenters say that. I think Gene Park of the Washington Post, he said, okay, I'm not really into it. Now I'm loving it, right? And it was like 10, 12-hour difference in playtime. So it's possible. I don't know. Like, it's interesting, or it hopefully will be fun, because it could maybe go either way for me, right? Maybe it picks up. Maybe it's just this way the entire game. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Make sure, as always, you're subscribed to the channel, bell icon turned on. I hope to see you all on the next one.